I had not exactly recuperated from my assault of laryngitis, and the bothering deteriorated until it became basic for me to hack the standard strategies one workers on these events, whether in chapel or the wilderness. For example, holding the breath and gulping hard gave no help until it turned into an instance of hack or exploded, and in urgency, I attempted to ease my throat by giving the caution call of the langur monkey. Sounds are challenging to convert into words, and for those of you who are not familiar with our wildernesses, I would attempt to depict this alert call, which can be heard for a portion of a mile as falcon rehash it and again at short spans and winding up with center. All langurs don't call it tigers, yet the ones in our slopes positively do, and as this tiger had most likely heard the call the entire life, it was the one sound I could make to which he wouldn't give the smallest of consideration. My delivering of the bring in this crisis didn't sound exceptionally persuading, however, it had the ideal impact of eliminating the bothering from my throat. For 30 minutes from that point, I kept on sitting on the stone looking for development and tuning in for news from the wilderness people, and when I had fulfilled myself that the tiger was not any place inside my scope of vision, I got off the stone and, moving with the greatest amount of wariness, went down to the kill. End of Section 5. Section 6. I lament, I'm not ready to let you know what weight of tissue a completely mature tiger can consume at a feast, yet you will have some thought of his ability when I let you know he can eat a mid-year in 2 days and a bison in 3 days, leaving potentially a little nibble for the 4th day. The bison I had tied up was not completely mature yet. He was in no way, shape or form a little creature, and the tiger had eaten roughly 50% of him. With a dinner of that aspect within him, I felt sure he had not gone the distance, and as the ground was as yet wet and what stays over one more little, while I chose to figure out in what course he had headed and assuming conceivable tail him, there was a disarray of tracks close to the kill. Yet by going round and enlarging circles, I found the track the tiger had made while leaving delicate-footed creatures are somewhat more challenging to follow than hard-footed ones, yet following some serious time experience, following requirements as little exertion as a weapon canine applies, while following rising as quietly and as leisurely as a shadow. I took up the track, realizing that the tiger would be not far off. When I had gone 100 yards, I arrived in a level piece of ground 20 square feet and covered with that assortment of short delicate grass that has profoundly scented roots. On this grass the tiger had pathed, the engraving of his body being plainly apparent as I was taking a gander at the engraving and speculating about the size of the creature that had made it. I saw a portion of the pieces of turf that had been squashed down spring erect. This demonstrated that the tiger had been gone 1 moment or so. You will have some thought of the design when I let you know that the tiger had brought the kill down from the north and on leaving it had gone west, and that the stone on which I had sat the kill and where I was currently standing framed the marks of a triangle, one side of which was 40 yards, and the other different sides 100 yards in length. My most memorable idea on seeing the grass spring erect was that the tiger had seen me and moved off. However, this I before long found was not likely, for neither the stone nor the kill was apparent from the grass plot, and that he had not seen me and moved after I had taken up his track. I was very sure. Why then had he left his agreeable bed and disappeared? The sun beaming on the rear of my neck gave the response. It was currently 9 o'clock of a terribly warm May morning, and a look at the sun and the treetops over which it had come showed that it had been radiating on the grass for 10 minutes. The tiger had clearly tracked down at 2 sweltering and disappeared a couple of moments before my appearance to search for an obscure spot. I have let you know that the grass plot was 20 feet square. On the far side to that from which I had moved toward there was a fallen tree lying north and south. This tree was around 4 feet in width, and as it was lying along the edge of the grass plot in which I was presently standing, it was 10 feet from me. The root end of the tree was laying on the slope, which here went up steeply and was congested with brushwood, and the branch end, which had been snapped off when the tree had fallen, was extending out over the slope past the tree. The slope gave off an impression of being pretty much opposite, and stumbling into its essence was a limited edge of rock which vanished into thick wilderness 30 yards further on. Assuming my gather that the sun had been the reason for the tiger changing his position was right, there was not any more appropriate spot than the lee of the tree for him to have taken cover in, and the main approach to fulfilling myself on this point was to approach the tree and investigate. Here an image seen a long time back in Punch magazine streaked into my memory. The image was of a solitary athlete who had gone out to chase lions, and who, on looking up onto the stone he was passing, gazed directly into the smiling substance of the most tremendous lion. In Africa, under the image, was composed, when you go out searching for a lion be very certain you need to see him valid. There would be this little contrast, that though my companion in Africa turned upward into the lion's face, I would gaze down into the tiger's in any case. The two cases, expecting that the tiger was on the most distant side of the tree, would be fundamentally the same as slipping my feet forward an inch at a time on the delicate grass. I currently began to move toward the tree, and took care of about a portion of the distance that isolated me from it. At the point when I saw a dark and yellow item around 3 inches long on the rough edge, which I currently saw was a very much involved gameway. Briefly, I gazed at this unmoving item until I was persuaded that it was the tip of the tiger's tail. Assuming the tail was pointing away from me, the head should clearly be towards me, and as the edge was just exactly 2 feet wide, the tiger must be hunkering down and holding back to spring the second my head showed up over the bole of the tree. The tip of the tail was 20 feet from me and permitting 8 feet for the tiger's length, while squatting his head would be 12 feet away, yet I ought to need to move toward much closer before I ought to have the option to see enough of his body to have a devastating chance, and a devastating shot it would need to be if I had any desire to leave on my feet, and presently, without precedent for my life. I lamented my propensity for conveying an uncocked rifle. The security catch of my 0.450 400 makes an exceptionally unmistakable snap when lost, and to make any sound currently would either bring the tiger right on top of me or send him straight down the precarious slope, with practically no chance of my having a chance. Inch by inch I again began to crawl forward until the opening of the tail, and after it the rump materialized. When I saw the rump I might have yelled with pleas, for they showed that the tiger was not hunching and prepared to spring, yet was resting as there was just space for his body on the 2-foot wide edge. He had extended his rear legs out and was laying them on the upper parts of an oak sapling growing up at the essence of the practically opposite slope. 1 more foot forward and his paunch materialized, and from the customary manner by which it was hurling all over I realized that he was sleeping less leisurely now. I pushed ahead until his shoulder, and afterward his entire length, was presented to my view. The rear of his head was laying on the edge of the grass plot, which reached out for 3 or 4 feet past the fallen tree. His eyes were quick closed and his nose was highlighting paradise. Adjusting the sights of the rifle on his brow, I squeezed the trigger, and keeping in mind that keeping a consistent tension on it pushed up the well-being get. I had no clue about how this inversion of the standard strategy for releasing a rifle would work, yet it took care of business. And when the weighty projectile at that short reach collided with his temple, not even a quiver went through his body. His tail stayed loosened up straight. His rear legs kept on laying on the upper parts of the sapling. His nose actually highlighted paradise, nor did his position change in the smallest when I sent a second and very superfluous slug to follow the principle. The main change observable was that his stomach had quit hurling all over and that blood was streaming down his brow from 2 shockingly little openings. I don't have the foggiest idea how the closeness of a tiger responds on others, yet to me it generally leaves with a short of breath feeling due conceivably as much to fear as to energy, and a craving for a little reprieve. I plunked down on the fallen tree and lit the cigarette I had denied myself from the day my throat had turned sour, and permitted my contemplations to meander. Any undertaking all around achieved gives fulfillment, and the one just finished was not an obvious explanation for my attendance at that spot was the obliteration of the alpha predator, and from the time I had left the street 2 hours beforehand, just after the second I pushed up the well-being, discover everything including the languor call had worked without a hitch and without a solitary shortcoming. In this there was extraordinary fulfillment, the sort of fulfillment I envision a writer should feel when he composes finish to the plot that stage by stage has unfurled itself similarly as he wanted it to. For my situation anyway, the completion had not been palatable, for I had killed the creature that was lying 5 feet from me in his rest. My own sentiments with regards to this issue are, I am aware, of little interest to other people, yet it seems obvious me that perhaps you additionally could think it was not cricket, and all things considered I ought to jump at the chance to put the contentions before you that I involved on myself, with the expectation that you will find them more good than I did. These contentions were the tiger was an apex predator, and that it was preferable dead over alive. Be thusly, it had no effect whether he was conscious or snoozing when killed, and see that had I left when I saw his paunch hurling all over, I ought to have been ethically liable for the passings of the multitude of people he killed from that point. Great overall and sound contentions you will concede for my having gone about as I did, yet the lament stays that through apprehension about the results too myself or anxiety toward losing the main opportunity one could at any point get, or potentially a mix of the two. I didn't stir the dozing creature and allow him a brandishing opportunity. The tiger was dead, and assuming my prize was to be saved from falling into the valley underneath and destroyed, it was fitting to get him off the edge with as little deferral as conceivable. Inclining the rifle, for which I had no further use, against the fallen tree, I moved up to the street, and when round the corner close to the developed land, I measured my hands and sent a cooee reverberating over the slopes and valleys. I had no event to rehash the require. My men had heard my 2 shots while getting back from taking care of the principal bison, and had run back to the hovel to gather whatever number locals as could reasonably be expected, who were close enough to hear. Now, on hearing my cooee, the entire group came higgledy-piggledy in the distance to meet me. When bold robes and a hatchet had been obtained, I took the group back with me, and after I had gotten the ropes around the tiger, willing hands half carted and half hauled him away the edge and over the fallen tree and onto the plot of grass. Here I would have cleaned the tiger, yet the residents beseeched me not to do so, saying that the ladies and offspring of Carthcanola and the connecting towns would be extremely disheartened in the event that they were not offered a chance of seeing the tiger with their own eyes and fulfilling themselves that the apex predator in apprehension, about whom they had resided for such countless years, and who had laid out a rule of dread over the entire region, was undoubtedly dead, while 2 or 3 saplings, to help with conveying the tiger back to the cottage, were being felt. I saw a portion of the men disregarding their hands the tiger's appendages, and realized they were fulfilling themselves, that their declaration that the tiger had not been experiencing any old or devastating injuries was right. At the cabin, the tiger was set in the shade of a wide-spreading tree, and the townspeople were educated that it was available to them up to 2 o'clock longer. I was unable to give them, for it was an exceptionally hot day, and there was dread of the hair slipping and the skin being demolished. I personally had not taken a gander at the tiger, however. At 2 p.m., when I laid him on his back to begin the cleaning, I saw that a large portion of the hair from the internal side of his left foreleg was absent, and that there were various little cuts in the skin from which yellow liquid was oozing. I didn't cause to notice these cuts, and left the cleaning of the leg, which was extensively more slender than the right leg, to the last, when the skin had been eliminated from the remainder of the creature. I made a long trimmed from the chest to the stack of the putrefying left leg, and as I eliminated the skin, coaxed out of the tissue consistently porcupine plumes, which the men remaining round enthusiastically seized as trinkets. The longest of these plumes was around 5 inches, and their complete number was somewhere in the range of 25 and 30. The tissue under the skin from the tiger's chest to the stack of his foot was sudsy, and of a dull yellow variety. Make enough have made the unfortunate monster groan when he strolled, and very adequate justification behind his having become and having stayed an alpha predator, for porcupine plumes don't break up regardless of how long they are installed in the tissue. I have extricated potentially 200 or 300 porcupine plumes from the man-eating tigers. I have shot large numbers of these. Plumes have been north of 9 creeps long and as thick as pencils. The greater part were installed in hard muscles, a couple were wedged solidly among bones, and all were severed short under the skin. Certainly the tigers gained the blankets while killing porcupines for food, yet the inquiry emerges, to which I lament I can't offer any palatable response, why creatures with the knowledge and the nimbleness of tigers ought to have been so thoughtless as to drive plumes profound into themselves, or be at such a leisurely pace in their developments as to allow porcupines, whose main technique for guarding themselves is by strolling in reverse, to do so, and further why the plumes ought to have been severed short, for porcupine plumes are not fragile. Panthers are similarly as inclined toward porcupines as our slope tigers are. Nevertheless, they don't stall plumes out in them, for they kill porcupines, as I have seen, by getting them by the head. And why tigers don't utilize similar protected and clear strategy for killing as panthers utilize, thus keep away from injury to themselves, is a secret to me.